Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of WTF with Angela Heise, Alan Stevens, and myself, Dr. Chris. Today, we're talking about listening. We're talking about listening, which is quite a bit of an ironic statement, really. We're talking about listening. So, things like active listening are really important. And Alan knows an awful lot about active listening because of the nature of his work, especially. So, Alan, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I was going to say, what to say, Chris?
Couldn't hear you.
But that's the situation. Quite often we're listening to respond to people. When people are talking, we want to respond to it, as opposed to listening to understand the person and understanding them, but being active in that as well, so that they actually see that we understand. So when I'm talking to somebody, I like to ask a lot of questions. And then at the end of it, I always like, when I think I've thought of every question I can think of and I've asked those, I will ask another question again. And that's usually around the format of, from what you've been telling me, this is what I understand. Have I got it right? So by asking that question, they know that I've been listening to them. They also then can confirm whether I've got it right or not. And if they haven't, that could even be a better win again than if they say yes, because now I will say, well, where did I go wrong? So now I'm not asking questions. We're actually having a conversation. And then in that, it's very active at that point because I'm really listening to what they're saying and I'm responding to that. And I know that they're doing the same thing with me because they knew that I was interested in what they were saying. I was focused on it. So they knew I was listening. And then they were able to get engaged in that conversation at a deeper level as well with me.
Indeed. And the operative word that you just mentioned, Alan, is engagement. And we can't engage without listening. And
that's it.
Yeah, and that active listening that you talk about as well, it's really important. And it's a courtesy thing as well. So Angela, what are your thoughts around that?
What? This is the thing that kills listening. We are not made for splitting attention. It's a training. If you want to split your attention, and I'll be honest, women are better than men because we've got more gray matter, which allows the transfer of information much more quickly. That's a biological fact. But iPhones or any kind of electronic device kills connection, it kills attention, it kills listening. So I can't tell you how many times, and you've done that. You go into restaurants and there are 4 people sitting around the table and they're all on their devices. And there's nobody listening because nobody's talking. But I also see parents where the children want attention and the parents on the phone going, and the child gets more and more aggravated and more intense. And then the parent blows up eventually and says, come on, here you go, and gives them a device as well. I've just saw a video of a probably 5-6 month old baby that had a phone and the mother took it away laughingly. And the baby went ballistic and started screaming and crying and rolling around on the floor. Mom just went, oh, come on, and laughing, look at this, isn't this funny? Gave her back the phone and the child immediately stopped crying, knew how to navigate the screen, could not stand. This was a tiny little baby. I look at that and I want to cry. Because what are we teaching children?
Well, indeed, and not necessarily related directly to listening, but that context. A good friend and colleague and client of mine is a professor of neuroscience, and she writes extensively on devices and things like that, and how dangerous they are in that sense. And one of the things she cites is new mothers who are breastfeeding their babies are no longer making that eye contact with them. They're breastfeeding here and looking at their phone there, and so that crucial connection between baby and mother are not being made, and it's really, really scary. And she's a professor of neuroscience. She's know what she's talking about, and it's in fact yesterday, just another example. I was finishing off a breakfast, and there was a family sitting sort of near me, and both the young boys were on devices as the family got up to leave the restaurant, and oh, come on, and Dad says, come on, kids there, come on. And he came back, and the dad just went, and just snapped his fingers. I thought, how insulting on both points of view. Yeah, kid to not listen to the parents say we've got to go, and for the parents to snap their fingers like a like a dog. I thought, oh my God, what are we coming to? It's horrible. It's just awful. So we don't listen to each other at all anymore. In those kind of situations, and it's really unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah, that situation.
Sorry, you just think we've meandered back from the topic by talking about babies crying and people snapping fingers. That's all part of it. That's all part of the listening scenario, because we are no longer present with each other. We can't really read what's going on anymore.
Well, that situation you just mentioned with the breastfeeding, the mother is looking at a device. She's not looking at the child. She's not connecting with the child. There's a disconnect there. Now, I know that, well, women have a larger corpus callosum between the two hemispheres of the brain. It's like a superhighway. Us guys have got a bush track. Ours is much smaller. But the whole thing is, regardless of that, nobody multitasks efficiently.
No, indeed.
Every test I've done with people, men, women, we all fail on that when we think that we multitask, because we can't do two things at once, because especially if it requires our right side of our brain and our left side of our brain at the same time, the end result is we switch backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
And it's accelerating and slowing down all the time. We're not on a constant travel. So if you want to be efficient, you've got two jobs to do. Do one, then do the other. Be present with the people if they're around you and they're talking. Listen to what they're saying. Don't think about other things that you've got to get done, because you're not going to do that efficiently, and you're going to break the connection with that other person at the same time.
Yeah.
Sorry, Angela, go on.
If you really want to find out how badly we multitask, not just between 2 tasks and 3. So the first step is you write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 until 24. And then you write ABC, and then you time yourself. You do one task after the other, and then you do 1A, 2B, 3C, and so on, and see how much longer that takes you. Do that while you're listening to somebody tell you something important, and notice what happens, because that's generally for people a really big wake-up call. The problem is people know when we're not connecting to them. They know when we're not listening. I sometimes do this in workshops. I give people the task to listen to somebody with great attention and then lose attention. I give them a signal and I say, play on your phone, tie your shoelaces, look out of the window, whatever it is. But you still make appreciative noises like, I tried to demonstrate that earlier. But what you do is you notice that people get really irritated. I had people go, hey, am I boring you? Or if I had an observer in the exercise who was just there to look at what's happening, people would turn around and start talking to the observer when the other person disconnected, because there was no, they just wanted to talk to somebody who was listening. To be heard is one of our core needs.
Yes, indeed. And speaking of workshops, one of the things I will almost always do with my clients is to get them to ask themselves the question, what do I look like when I'm listening? And you do a checklist. Start at the top, work down, whether it's in a face-to-face meeting or even in a Zoom meeting. What do I look like when I'm listening? Am I actively listening? Do I look like I'm paying attention? And that's why, when in Zoom meetings, I tend to write lots of notes. And so I'm looking away. But so I make sure that, and anybody who's watching can't see the fact that I'm writing. But so I make sure that when I come back, I make this pen visible. So subconsciously, people know that I'm taking notes. The other thing about that is it demonstrates a courtesy of, this meeting is important enough to take notes about. So what do I look like when I'm listening? A really good question for all of us to ask ourselves.
That's it. So quite often when I'm listening to people talking here, one of the things I've learned to do is actually write while I'm still looking at the screen. Now, I've got dreadful writing at the best of times, so it doesn't make any difference for me.
When you try to reread it, you go, what the hell was I writing? What does that say?
But it's been interesting that my brain is actually switched on to it. So it does come across legible, that I can read it later on. But I want to make sure the person that I'm talking to knows that I'm listening, because if not, you're not making a connection, especially if you're selling products and services, etc. You really need to listen to that person. You need to know why they would need your services in the first place. If you haven't covered that, They're not going to buy from you. So you've got to ask questions. You've got to listen to them. You've got to get all that information from them.
And there's a depth of conversation sorry, Alan, but there's that means there's a depth of conversation we need to engage in. It's not just superficial crap.
That's it. As you said, the word engaging is one of the most important parts there.
Yes, it's all about engagement. Yeah.
Exactly.
Angela, would you like to take us out on that one with your outro, your wonderful little outro?
Well, we could continue this conversation for a long time. So please have a look at what do you look like when you're listening? Where does your attention go? How much of the conversation do you actually recall? All of these things. But let's continue to build bridges of respect, one conversation at a time. Please join us next time.